trade that advances inclusive development, creates better jobs for women and men, and reduces barriers to participation in global chains for women can perhaps best realize the benefits that trade agreements seek to achieve. Because this outcome does not always result from trade liberalization, however, gender impact assessments can be useful tools. Gender impact assessments can be carried out by many different actors, ranging from universities, government ministries, donor agencies, to research or evaluation firms, among other groups. They help identify the intended and the unintended impacts of trade liberalization on women and men across sectors, countries, or even regions. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to undertake an extensive literature review of these impact assessments of trade in the Latin American region, looking both at academic and non-academic literature. And if you're interested, the full report is available on the North-South Institute website. But in a nutshell, I found three main modalities. The first is what we call ex-ante assessments. So as the name denotes, these are undertaken before a free trade agreement is signed. And gender analysis is often included in sustainability impact assessments. These SIAs use economic modeling to predict possible social and economic impacts of economic changes one usually associates with implementing a free trade agreement. Consultations with stakeholders such as labor unions and business associations representing women, just to name two examples, should evidently also be conducted by policymakers in the lead up to complement these SIAs and to identify key equity concerns. So the Commonwealth Gender Aware Framework is a good example of an ex-ante assessment framework. And as a result of this first type of analysis, trade negotiators can include specific provisions to avoid discriminatory practices by firms in the relevant agreement chapters. Moreover, they're really important because institutions or mechanisms can be identified, such as interdepartmental teams with relevant ministries and key stakeholders, to monitor the gender issues after an agreement comes into force. In the Latin American region, the labor side agreement and the core text of the NAFTA mention gender concerns quite broadly. And therefore, workers involved in NAFTA-related industries have the right to challenge discriminatory practices by firms or labor laws of the three parties to the agreement on that basis. According to some former Canadian trade officials I've interviewed, the agendas of annual NAFTA Commission meetings also included a review of gender issues raised by Canada, Mexico, or the US, which is interesting because it created a bit of an ongoing dialogue on these issues as the agreement was rolled out. The second type of impact assessment is called an ex post assessment. Technical assistance between trading partners often provides scope for carrying out this type of assessment. And examples here include USAID's Greater Access to Trade Expansion Project, or GATE. And this used a pro-poor and gender-aware value chain analysis in over a dozen countries, including Peru in the Latin American region between 2005 and 2009, among other world regions. GATE aimed at reducing gender-based impediments to growth, and at the same time sought to increase women's participation in international trade in a variety of ways. So the GATE country reports are a worthwhile read as well for policymakers. Another example is the Canada America's Technical Assistance Fund, known as the CATRA, which encourages gender-sensitive cooperation among our regional trading partners, and which my colleague Pablo will speak to in the next clip. So the third type of assessment is a sectoral impact assessment. These are basically field or case research studies which analyze the gendered impacts of trade in a particular sector of importance that the researchers or the government want to look at. So in the Latin American and Caribbean region, I found that there were many, many studies on agriculture and textiles, for instance. And they compare a wide range of data sets or indicators over time to do this. The framework is often biased towards labor market and employment analysis, however, due to data constraints. So where are we at now after having developed these three main types of gender impact assessments to trade? Well, unfortunately, in many agreements that I've looked at, gender concerns aren't included at all. And if they are included, they don't go much beyond acknowledging that women may be impacted by discrimination in employment. So they use the language of employment and labor laws quite a lot. But since the 90s, since the NAFTA was included, we haven't really broadened that scope for analysis very much. For instance, in the Canada FTA with Peru and Colombia, they mention discrimination in employment in the labor side agreement. I think that there's more work to do here. So as such, civil society groups play an important role in assessing the impacts of trade on women, often sourcing their information from networks and partners on the ground. Oxfam International, for instance, and their work on gender justice is an example here. Civil society-led assessments highlight the need for more substantive text around equity in trade agreements going forward. And if you were considering designing a gender impact assessment for trade, just a couple more points to consider. First, it's important to know the purpose of the impact assessment from the outset and how the new knowledge will be used. And secondly, it could be a good idea to identify appropriate methods and actors to involve on that basis, the basis of what the purpose, the end goal is. It's a good idea, if there is a budget for it, for policymakers to support all three of these main types of gender impact assessments: ex ante, ex post, and sector case studies if possible, to ensure as well that a broad-based analysis is available to all stakeholders. At the end of the day, gender impact assessments are only valuable tools when they mitigate against negative impacts of trade on men and women. Or, I suppose, that they reduce the disparities in trade gains. This is more likely when work is done on an ongoing basis, starting before a free trade agreement is signed.